Welcome to Archway's Threads, a show focusing on the threads of family and recovery support services that help make up the tapestry of life in recovery. Join us as we share stories from peers and participants in the field and practice of peer recovery support and family support and strengthening. And now, your host, Archway CEO, Michelle Lennon.
Hello, everyone. Michelle Lennon here, host of the Archway Threads podcast, and we are continuing our conversation once again with Carina Raya. We hope you enjoy this episode and have seen the earlier two episodes where we started our conversations, where we talk about a lot of things, affecting the recovery community today.
Little did I know. So the woman who watched the cafeteria, she was like the attendant or whatever, was in recovery. She was in AA. And I would hang out with her all day. And I did not stop using drugs at that time. And I did not, get into recovery for many years. But she never judged me for that, for one. And for two, she maintained this non-judgmental curiosity, asking about how I was or what I was interested in, and just having a genuine conversation with me. And I looked forward to that. So it made me go to school. I graduated. I got my diploma.
And a huge impact on you.
Yeah, can you imagine? And I still think back, I don't remember exactly the things this woman had said to me, but I remember the time that she took to connect with me.
Yeah.
And that mattered a lot. And it has not ever stopped mattering. Although maybe, the results were not immediate. So she never got to see the payoff. But I think it's a tough thing with working with people with substance use disorders. The payoff can often be
down the road that you don't see.
When I stopped going to the hospital, people assumed that I either died or they probably thought I died, because I don't know if it's the stereotypical, a generally accepted, you see somebody in bad shape all the time and then you don't see them. Well, you don't expect that they actually got better. But, it happens.
Well, circling back to sharing your story, because I do think when we think about how we treat people that are in recovery, right? And we, even in the coaching profession, we talk about, we don't want to treat people as objects at all, if we can help it, and we would prefer not to treat them as if we're the expert on their life, right? As recipients of our wisdom and our knowledge and all of this stuff, right? But really want to treat people as the resource that, hey, you're the expert in your life. Let me dig out some information so that we can work together. And when we start getting into the realm of advocacy, sharing the story becomes more personal. It does put you at risk for being objectified.
Yes, it does.
And it sounds like that was a little bit of your experience with the happened to be, a yogi and being kind of held up as, hey, this is the yogi in recovery and come to our our recovery yoga class or whatever.
Yeah.
And I also think about how another way we objectify people is separating people in recovery from the rest of the community.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about that because we're trying to figure out, how do we advertise our programs that they're recovery friendly or for people in recovery, but all community is welcome, because we want to be able to integrate people in recovery into society and into community. And for me, my background was early childhood, right? And family support. So we have something we call the pyramid model. And at the base of the pyramid model is this well-educated workforce. And it goes up to targeted supports for the kid that needs the most support, right? So we try to do everything that's good for everybody, and not single out the person. And I was thinking that's kind of what we want for recovery programming or supporting folks in recovery is that it's good for everybody and that everybody can be here. And it's not just about the fact that you're in recovery, but you're part of us.
It's a really good point. So, when I had started doing yoga, I had already, been to rehab. I had, tried AA and stuff. I had tried all of the people in recovery only groups.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me, those did not ever work for me. But then when I started going to yoga, it was And I also joined like a knitting group, which I think about a lot recently because I recently picked up knitting after 10 years. But I joined these groups that were like mixed. There were some people in recovery and there was, probably the majority of people who weren't.
Yeah.
But those are the groups that helped, where it was just like a whole bunch of random people that were like, oh, hey, we're glad you're here. Let's all work on trying to do some cool project together.
Yeah.
Whether it be, a physical yoga class or whether it be a knitting project,
Yeah. That's awesome. Because actually one of the young people that we're working with, she's awesome. And again, not a matter of abstinence, but she and I have been talking since she was about 13. She's in her 20s now. And I love this kid, but there are folks that come in here and they think as a recovery center that we're just going to be talking about addiction health. And it's like, no. And like the whole thing we were talking about was like building a business, because it's like what I have seen over the years is like when people find their purpose, if we can support lighting a fire into that, that's really what is the thing, and yeah. And just thinking about advocacy, if advocacy is part of your thing, I think that's great, But as you were saying, we don't always see the role models out there.
Right.
Because for some people they've entered recovery, they may not even identify as in recovery. Because for many people it's just part of their story. And sometimes like they're not too proud of, maybe their behavior back then or whatever. So it's just part of the story. And once it's done for them. So it's like, recovery advocacy, again, it's like we don't want to force people to say, hey, I'm in recovery. But we also need those voices.
Yeah. And I guess on that sort of topic, I do want to provide like a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Where like I'm obviously a huge proponent of, sharing your story, having your voice heard, with your own autonomy over it and everything. But it's also like whoever decides to, get out there and share their story, be warned, I guess, that like I would say 9 out of 10, or even like 99% at this point of my advocacy work and, being this sort of person that's trying to further the agenda of people who have or are using drugs, it's all been very positive. There are more positive experiences and more helpful and wonderful people out there than there are not. However, I will say that when I was in college, I was an intern at this nonprofit based out of Portland. And I love advocacy across the board. So I was working with this organization and we were going to Bangladesh to provide medical care and medical supplies to sex workers in a brothel in Tangai. And I was really excited about it. Lived overseas. I have a lot of experience learning languages and interacting with people of different cultures. For me, it's like, I love learning about that stuff. So that's why it's like, it's good for me. I'm not trying to make anyone learn about me. I want to learn about them. And from the moment I started this internship, the president and CEO of the organization really started to single me out. And initially it was because she didn't like my hair, which, sure, controversial, dreadlocks. It's 2025. People's hair is their own business. But she didn't like it. So, started to single me out based on that. And then we ended up going overseas, which she kind of gave me a hard time about. And I didn't see the red flags. I thought she didn't like my hair and I thought that was sort of the end of it. And I wish that I would have taken that red flag more seriously. Like, if you think that somebody might be discriminatory, like, don't keep going. They're not going to get any better. So we went overseas and this person was behaving in ways that I wouldn't consider to be like helpful or positive towards these sex workers. It was judgmental. There was like coercion to like take pictures for like advertisements and stuff. The medications we were giving out were expired, which I did not know ahead of time. which is against the law and also ethically, morally reprehensible in my opinion. People who are desperate for healthcare will do desperate things, and it's not okay to take advantage of that. So I had voiced some concerns while I was there, which then of course caused more retaliation. And because I was there for school, there were certain assignments that I had to do.
Mhm.
And one of them was just on site in Portland. I had to take a picture of myself on the job, not for any publication, but just for a school project. And the woman was very upset, saying that I was trying to steal their something or steal their publicity. So I couldn't complete the assignment. I got exempted from it. But then the school wanted to publish me in the school magazine for, the traveling that I had done. And there was a picture of me, and I was taking somebody's blood pressure. I don't know if you can see in the camera. No, kind of washed out. I have a lot of self-harm scars on my arms. I didn't have this tattoo at the time, and this arm really bad. They've been there for 20 years. Longer than 20 years, 22 years. I can't do anything about them. And then she started saying that no pictures of me could exist near her logo because I didn't represent their brand. She said people who are addicts are not, that isn't part of who they are as an organization.
Oh, wow.
So it really spiraled out of control, the type of discrimination that I was facing, and it was really painful. And I was not supported by my university, and I did not know where to turn for help. And had I not been, balls deep in recovery at that point, 100%, with the risk of, using it again or making poor choices based on how I felt.
You're so young.
It's, and I think that's the cautionary tale, is when you share your story, knowing that you're sharing it with safe people is really important.
Yes.
And then if you get to a place where you're like me and you're super outspoken and want to tell everyone and really make your point, make sure, that you do have a lot of recovery under your belt and you have a lot of people around you who will support you. Know that you have that support, because, for me, when this was happening, I was part of the LEAP group. So I told them about it. And I think if I didn't have them who understood
what is the LEAP group?
The Lived Experience Advisory Panel, that advocacy group that I started before I started college with the New Hampshire Foundation for Healthy Communities. If I did not have that group of people to tell them what happened, I don't know.
You would have been completely isolated.
Yeah.
And maybe convinced that they were right.
I mean, they
That's
had
what's
happened. I was right for part of it.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean is even with, 10 plus years at that point of recovery under my belt, it was horrible. I second guessed myself.
Yeah.
Shameful. And because I couldn't make a complaint, and my school wouldn't allow me to move forward with a formal complaint, that also was super made me feel totally invalidated
and isolated from your community.
Yeah. And then, this woman was saying what good friends she was with the president of my university. And then when I was applying to medical school at that university I didn't get in, and there were all these complications with my application. And I was like, oh my God, is it because I, told my story?
Yeah.
So it was definitely a solid year. I'm like, oh my God, did I do the wrong thing?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, kind of what I mean about sometimes making the right choice, regardless of the negative consequences. I think I made the right choice, because at the end of the day, I realized that I probably wouldn't want to go to medical school somewhere where, people were discriminatory against people who have experienced mental health struggles or, experienced chaotic drug use.
Right.
That was a big lesson. It was really hard to learn.
Yeah.
But, I think I made the right choice. But again, cautionary tale.
Tough. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't realize collegiate recovery is not everywhere. And, we have been very fortunate. We just the last 3 episodes was this young woman, Carol LaPlante, who basically founded the Plymouth Peers program at Plymouth State.
Wow.
And it was the same kind of feeling of like, she had a lot of support from professors though.
Wow.
In her experience, she shares this, but just feeling so isolated from the rest of the community.
Yeah.
So isolated, because it's like, if you're not part of party culture
Mm-hmm.
and you've made this mistake in your life has happened, and it's like, then what? And how hard it is. And that's one of the things we just talking to somebody yesterday, another young person who stopped drinking, and it's kind of like, okay, what do we do socially now?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, honestly. You mentioned like the party culture and not being able to participate in that. Like, that's hard,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a type of college experience. And then on the other side, I was in like a rigorous like pre-medical program. So these are people that are not always necessarily doing like that much partying. I would say that probably people didn't have like any free time to like go to parties.
Yeah.
That's not always the case. Yeah, is rigorous,
Intense.
Yeah. And that group also still, because their whole life their nose has been stuck in a book or whatever, they're not familiar with recovery. So it's like you're bounced between like people who you can't relate with because they want to party, and then people you can't relate with because
they never did.
And you're like, oh my God, who am I? Where am I? Like, does anyone understand?
Yeah.
So
And so it is like pioneering, really. I mean, what you're doing, because like you say, like, to be loud and proud about your recovery, we have more of that. I think Greg Williams' work with Anonymous People kind of like raised the banner a little bit for people to start talking about this. Yes, I manage your finances, and yes, I'm in recovery, or yes, I'm teaching your children, and yes, I'm in recovery, or
which is so important. Like,
yeah,
we see in our daily lives, we see so much advocacy. Like, I'm on Instagram and it's like I see trans doctors like standing up for people's rights, and I see like Black female doctors with like these strong advocacy pages. But you know what I don't see? I have never seen somebody who ever engaged in injection drug use with a strong advocacy page.
Right. Unless they're in Hollywood. Like, I feel like that's I've never, as a doctor. Oh, but not as a doctor.
Yeah.
Fine. Not as a
someone
doctor.
Find me one. If you know somebody that like did heroin and became a doctor and has like an Instagram page, like, come find me.
Yeah.
I want to see it.
But you may be that role model for hundreds of people to follow.
I hope so. Because, I would have loved to have known even before I got into recovery, but like even when I was a little kid, I would have loved to have known all the options that were out there for the wide variety of the human experience.
Yeah, interesting. I saw somebody recently posted that like the only expectation was to go to college, and then like if you weren't going to college, like you were nothing, and put up a picture of like one of the trades. It might have been like a plumbing picture or something like that. And my son actually is an electrician today. And that was the thing, like my experience was college, but he hated school, he hated not his teachers, not his friends, not his basketball, not his soccer, but academics was so hard for him, and as an electrician, he's super successful. He's been loved by, the two employees he's had. He's, hoping to go out on his own. And, his sister, thankfully, has a BA in business administration. So they've talked about teaming up. And I think about, had I not been open to the idea of the trades, because I think you're right. It's like what you grow up with is what the expectation becomes. And then there's a glass ceiling there. And then, what I've seen is for people especially who have grown up in a family affected by poverty, that if the expectation wasn't college, then it was just like you settled for whatever came your way.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I love the most about being like a big boss, at a recovery center is watching that glass ceiling get smashed,
Yeah.
and we were just talking about this today. One of the people that I coached in recovery, actually the first person really. She's celebrating 10 years. She works for a police department.
Oh yeah.
Turning that around. Yeah. And, somebody else, I called my husband today because he was one of the people that was like one of our first coaches too. And just tell him, I had a little bit of a frustrating day at work today and kind of like, blah, 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 like we do, and have our safe people we could talk to. And, just being reminded, like the people that we have met that were experiencing homelessness and heroin addiction when we met them, one is finishing, clinical social work degree, a master's degree. And, one of them, got married, got kids back, bought a house, and just doing really well, posting all over Facebook how she loves her job, what she's doing now, working in this field, in a different part of the field though. And just, thinking about our staff here that are going to college now that never thought it was even a possibility.
Yeah.
And we've been able to connect to the resources. We've been lucky. Like the individual that was doing, the master's degree connected with HRSA funds that we were able to find. And
nice. I'm applying for a HRSA scholarship now.
Yeah. Well, because we need doctors, we need medical professionals, right? Yeah, it's important. And if people can't afford to do it, and like you said, you're a smart person, we miss out on that social benefit of the best minds in our country. And we're not finding pathways for them to reach that education.
About that, one of my pet peeves. So the number of disadvantaged students that are getting accepted into medical school has been declining every year. That's not okay. It's so not okay. The people who are in charge of helping you plan your health, if they don't have experience of your life, how the heck is that gonna work out at the end? You know what I mean? And part of that disenfranchisement is it's financial,
I just have to say, I'm reminded of the fact that the rehabilitation center that my husband's pain doctor wanted him to go to after one of his surgeries. She sent us home with all of the information, and I called the place. It's $40,000 self-pay only a month. And I had to tell her, I work as a part-time and home visitor. And he wasn't on disability or anything. My income was the only income. I'm like, where does she think? I was just stunned. And, we called 211, look at all the resources. And at the time, there are 2 centers now in New Hampshire that I know of that are handicap accessible. At that time, there was only one, and it didn't take our insurance. And so it's
handicap accessible thing drives me nuts. Also.
Yeah, but so I think the assumption for many people, is that when you pick up the phone and call a number, you're automatically going to get what you need. And again, it's another piece of advocacy that sometimes sharing that story becomes so important, because if that's the expectation, then people don't know that the needs exist, because unless you're going to access it, you just assume, you go to the hospital, you get what you need if you need to get well, and not that way at all. Yeah. Yeah. So if there was one thing you could change in the recovery-oriented system of care today, what would it be?
That's a really hard question.
Yeah.
If there was one thing I could change in the recovery-oriented community today, what would it be? I mean, so the recovery-oriented community
Or system of care.
Yeah, my point is when you say recovery-oriented community, it makes it sound like there's a bunch of like-minded people who are all working together.
I think the recovery community is far from like-minded.
That's my point. Is there are divisions where there doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
For example, the biggest division is between a sobriety or abstinence-based approach compared to a harm reduction approach. And if I could change anything, I would change that, because harm reduction approach doesn't mean that some people can't be abstinent, or that abstinence isn't the best option for some people, or that somebody might not eventually reach abstinence. But teaching abstinence only is only one option.
One option now.
And harm reduction is going to cast a wider net. Don't we want more people to enter recovery? More people, more different types of people, more ages of people, like more people on different incomes, everything. We want more people in recovery. And the only way to get more people in recovery is to cast a wider net. If we say sobriety only, that's only one small subset of all the people that need to enter recovery.
Mhm.
So if I could change one thing, it would be like getting rid of this division and having people be unified to understand that if we all were to work together, more people would end up being here.
Yeah.
And that's what matters.
I've always said that dead people can't find recovery. So if we don't reduce harm while people are actively using, what are we really saying?
Right.
That they don't want to.
Right. Exactly. You're devaluing people who use drugs, and like somebody who's, abstinent did use drugs at some point, and they could be, I don't know, king of the world, but like how do they have value suddenly when they're abstinent, but they didn't have value before? It doesn't make sense.
That is a conversation I often have with people that, you say you're not the same person. You are the same person. You are the same person. This is your life experience. It may have been a chapter in your history. It may be, that you don't behave the same way today. You don't go after the same things. You have different goals. You have purpose today. Maybe you didn't then, but you're still you.
Thank you for listening to Archways Threads. If there is a topic you'd like to see us cover, email us at podcast@archwaysnh.org or call us at 603-960-2128. Visit our website at archwaysnh.org to learn more about the Archways family of recovery and family resource centers.